Zoroastrianism is important for a number of reasons, but if you're a biblical scholar, you're trying to understand history in Mesopotamia, what's going on in Second Temple Judaism, etc., Zoroastrianism is fairly important. And the reason is because most of the Persian rulers were Zoroastrian, and their influence and their uh, rule saw to it that that culture was passed on. In fact, I think with Mandaism, Manichaeism, Gnosticism, I think it all has its roots back in Zoroastrianism. Now, that's not to say that they didn't have an impact upon Judaism and then Christianity that followed. I think there was some impact, and we'll talk about that just for a bit. But just to back up for a moment, Zoroastrianism, it's uncertain when it was begun. I know that it's named after Zoroaster, who was said to be a prophet, but there's wide disagreement on when he even lived. Everything from 2000 BC all the way to 600 BC. That's a wide range, but it's probably likely that he was on the latter end of that, because that's when Zoroastrianism was sort of on the rise. Now it's uncertain, really who some of these people really were who were conquering these various empires that had existed in the region. If we go back all the way to the Sumerians, and who was conquering who and who these people were, it said, hey, some people came from the east, and they came in and sort of took over, right? And you end up with what's called Ur-3, or that Ur-3 era in Sumeria, and that was finally ended by people who had come in from the east. And the east could have been India, could have been from there, but it's uncertain in so many cases. And so the reality of what happened is hard to pick apart. Nevertheless, some see that there's a connection between Hinduism and what happens in Zoroastrianism, right? There are the names of some of the gods that are mentioned in the Rig Veda, for instance, in Hinduism, are identical to those that are mentioned in Zoroastrianism. So it's not clear who had an effect on who, when Zoroaster lived, and how that worked itself out. But nevertheless, for our purposes, by the time of Cyrus the Great, which is about 600 BC, when the Israelites had been in Babylon and then now in the Persian Empire, Zoroastrianism is the dominant form of belief in that region. And so no doubt that culture is having an impact upon the lives of these Jewish people who are living in exile. Now, at the time of Cyrus the Great, he's allowing them to return home. And by the time you get to Darius, who comes after Cyrus the Great, Darius the Great is more monotheistic, in my opinion. If you look at the inscriptions and the writings that concern him and his tombs and all of these different things that are produced at that time, if you go to Cyrus the Great or even before that, it appears to be more polytheistic, and that is a disagreement that still exists today, whether or not Zoroastrianism is polytheistic or is it is it monotheistic? It's uncertain, and people come up with all sorts of things in between. Maybe it's monolatry. There's different levels of gods, and this is the best god or the highest god. There's some uncertainty there. But I think by the time you get to Darius, he is focused extremely upon Ahura Mazda, who is already said to be the supreme being anyway. Ahura Mazda means Lord of Wisdom, and his antithesis is Angra Mainyu. And Angra Mainyu is a sort of evil spirit. He's the sort of antithesis of Ahura Mazda, who's the Lord of Wisdom and of light and all of that. And Angra Mainyu is the darkness. He is the evil. He's the thing that's chaos instead of order. And these sort of understandings about the way that the world worked in this dualistic fashion, or what bleed off into becoming Gnostic tendencies, at least the roots of this faith likely predate the prophet Zoroaster. In fact, some of the cosmic battle scenes with Tiamat and these creatures are evident in other creation stories and mythologies from around Mesopotamia. So it likely predates him. He may have organized it in a particular way and popularized it to the point that it became an actual force to be reckoned with. And it's probably around the time of Cyrus the Great that he lived and that he propagated these things, which is why it becomes so dominant at that time. Now, there is this constant struggle, this dualistic idea that's present between Angra Mainyu and Ahura Mazda. But Angra Mainyu, the evil spirit, is not said to be an emanation or a creation of Ahura Mazda, the originator of things. He's said to be the absence of them. And so, in some sense, he's sort of a placeholder for evil things, or evil thoughts, or darkness itself, right? Just like darkness isn't really a thing, darkness is the absence of the light. And that's the way that Angra Mainyu was seen. So if there's disorder, that's Angra Mainyu. If there's order, that's Ahura Mazda. And these two concepts are constantly in play with one another. In some sense, it's almost like entropy from a scientific sense, right? If something isn't constantly doing the organizing, then things tend to go into disorder or chaos. And that's kind of the system that really is in place here. Their theology is based in the fact that all creatures have a moral choice and moral responsibility. This would include Ahura Mazda, God who could, because he has absolute free will, change his mind and do whatever he wants at any moment, which was the same thing as humans, that we would have the ability to choose at every moment anything and everything that we do, and so then alter the way that the future would come to be. There was said to be great regularity in the way that the world worked, however. The Zoroastrians were known for, studying cosmology in that sense. Looking up, you can see the way that the seasons develop and how daylight and sunset could be predicted with accuracy. You can know when one planet was going to be in one position versus another. And this was the work of Ahura Mazda, of ordering things. Now, occasionally, however, there were problems and troubles. Like if there was some comet that comes streaking in from some other place to create some disorder, right? This is Angra Mainyu. This is a problem for us because we need to get back to disorder. Anything that would pull you away from that, then, and if you went along with it, was in some sense, at least from a Christian point of view, like sinful, right? And so at the end of all things, when you died, there was going to be a judgment. And that judgment was going to be based upon whether you did good things or bad things, and all those moral choices that you had to make. And if you were very moral, then you would go on to be with God forever in the light. If it was an ambiguous life, your good and bad sort of leveled out, then you would go to a sort of purgatory, this place of having to be punished for some of those bad deeds in order that you might make it over to the place of light. And then lastly, if it was out of balance in the other direction, then you would go on into darkness, which was the home of Angra Mainyu, right? The place of darkness, or the absence of God. And this resurrection of the dead, in order to be judged in that way, is the connection that many scholars see that's emphasized between Judaism and the rabbinical beliefs that come from the Pharisees, the idea and the understanding of resurrection, and also within Christianity. Now, I don't think that Zoroastrianism is the originator of these things. However, I do think that there's an impact that they have upon Judaism and then therefore Christianity. Prior to going into exile, the Israelite people were focused more on the oral things. I think even the prophet Jeremiah says that he hated the lying pen of the scribes. It wasn't about written text so much as it was whatever God was speaking at that moment through the mouth of the prophets. But their presence in Persia and seeing their reliance upon scriptures and their uh, reliance upon the written text and upon education and teaching people how to read and write, and sometimes in several different languages, that rubbed off on them. And they saw from the text itself that you could study that text and learn what to do and what God wanted you to do or didn't want you to do. And we see that evidence already present in the prophets prior to that, as obedience was better than sacrifice, right? And so those ideas come back with Ezra and Nehemiah, and in the formation of Second Temple Judaism. And we have a thing called synagogues that develop, right, which are centered around the reading of the text and interpretation of the text, the application of the text to daily life. I think what happens is that the Zoroastrian influence caused them to emphasize certain things more than they had before. It wasn't completely invented, but emphasized more, so that it became more important in their daily lives, something that essentially wasn't part of the daily ritual or the daily part of life, and caused them to look into ideas about the Messiah and what is God going to do to fix the world in the end. And so now I can have these places like synagogues where I can study the text. And when I look at the text, I see prophecies concerning this messianic figure that God is going to send into the world. And so that does reflect a certain understanding that wasn't necessarily emphasized before. And it comes, I think, from the culture sort of rubbing off and getting them to do these things. God, even in the book of Isaiah, calls Cyrus, his Messiah, his Messiah, the one who would lead his people back. And so certainly the understanding of a Messiah, just as it was during the time of the judges, was already present within Judaism, but there's more emphasis placed on that. And so from a Christian point of view, then one could see that what's happening here is that God's using Cyrus to get these people to shift their focus in order that it might be ready for Jesus to come into the world as the Christ. That is the way I believe that many Christians would understand that argument to go. In addition, I think as another secondary issue here is that I think the presence of Zoroastrianism and the likelihood that the kings are involved, and again, ramping up through Cyrus the Great and Darius, the idea that they were supposed to do good deeds and good things, and they had to outweigh those bad things, caused them to evaluate the way that they would deal with their enemies in a different way, or the people that they ruled over. Because for the Persians and the people who were being ruled by the Zoroastrians were treated more kindly than their predecessors had treated them. They were allowed to live their own lives, worship in the way that they saw fit, order their lives, and to create order in the world and not chaos. And that's actually what's happening when Cyrus sends the people back, because Cyrus looks at Jerusalem and he's told by some of the Jewish officials that Jerusalem was in chaos, everything was in ruins, and that's not a good thing. If you're a Zoroastrian, you want things to be ordered, right? And you want the order of Ahura Mazda to live in and through you, and you have to do these good things. And so I send them back there in order that they might restore things and have a society that is very ordered and hierarchical, and that people could put their lives back together and worship in the way that they saw fit, so that their society would be put together again. Because chaos is Angra Mayu, and the good is Ahura Mazda. And so these things need to be. And this in turn causes then the Jewish people to be able to be returned to their own land. So it has not just an adjacent effect. It has an actually a direct impact on the future of the Jewish people, and therefore also Christianity. And for that matter, it has an impact on the world and upon Mesopotamia in general, as these various peoples were allowed to exist, where previously you would just go in and wipe everybody out and say your God is the champion. But that's not what happened there. They were allowing people not just to exist, but also to flourish and to teach them things that would help them to be able to survive and to give them benefit and help. And because Cyrus doesn't just say, okay, you can go back and do what you want, he actually sends them with money that comes from the government, that's from people in their own region that are being taxed to help out this other faith. In a sense, it's the first sort of glimpse of religious freedom that happens in the region. And I think that that's the largest impact that Zoroastrianism has on the entire area. You know, this idea of the freedom of expression, and it's okay that I can have these ideas and think through these things. And that bled off onto the rest of the culture in the region, and why the various different groups of Jewish people arose. You know, Essenes and Ecclesites and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all the rest. They were able to do this and to formulate their own opinions and to think through things on their own. And I think that that's a leftover from the Persian government that existed there before. And so for many reasons, you know, Zoroastrianism had a likely positive effect in many regards in the region. And so it's for this reason that I thought it necessary to deal with Zoroastrianism, because we can see the roots not only of, you know, positive influences that come, but also all of the negatives too, right? From, you know, from the same group of people, we get the formation of synagogues and being able to think through things and having some sense of religious freedom. And at the same time, we get Gnostic groups who are breaking off and doing their own thing, and we have the good and the bad happening, you know. And that's the reality of the way history works, right? It isn't just one way or the other. So I hope this broad overview has been helpful for you. Hope you join me next time.